We'll be getting started in just a few moments. Welcome, and thank you for joining us. I'm Liz Whitehead, Managing Editor of Events at U.S. News and World Report. Today's webinar explores the U.S. News Best Business Schools Rankings. In late March, U.S. News released the 2023 edition of these rankings, which include full-time, part-time, and online programs. You can access them and all of our graduate school rankings at usnews.com/grad. We are recording video of today's webinar, and registrants will receive a link to video from the session in the coming days. Video will also be archived on usnews.com. The webinar today will begin with a brief presentation, but we want to spend the majority of time today addressing your questions, which you can type into the Q&A feature in Zoom on your screen. Our team will review these in real time and give voice to as many as we can during the course of the hour. If you can, please include your name, title, and institution so we can learn a little bit more about you. You can also always contact official@usnews.com with additional questions, including those that might be specific to your institution. Now, I'm pleased to welcome two of my U.S. News colleagues to the webinar, who are the originators and guiding force behind the Best Business Schools rankings, and will discuss the methodology used to develop them. Bob Morse, Chief Data Strategist, and Eric Brooks, Principal Data Analyst. Thank you both. Over to you, Bob, to start off the presentation.
Okay, well
we're just going to get the slideshow queued up and we'll begin.
Well, I'll start talking while you can tell me when the slideshow is keyed up.
Okay, one moment.
Well, I want to thank my U.S. News colleagues, Michael and Liz, and the U.S. News Live team for arranging this webinar. It's our second webinar about the education rankings, and we hope this is going to be, a continuing series as we, dig deeper into to specific aspects of the rankings. And next slide, please. So this particular webinar, as we advertised it, is focusing on the Best Business School rankings. And we have been publishing the MBA rankings annually since 1990. And they're definitely among the most viewed rankings, educational rankings on usnews.com. But our portfolio of business school rankings, because it's a very important field in higher education, is broad. And we cover both the full-time MBA rankings, and we have 13 specialties. We have part-time MBA, undergraduate, the online MBA, and that with specialties, the online master's non-MBA, and an online bachelor's. But this presentation we'll put more emphasis on the MBA rankings, but we're also going to at least briefly discuss the other business school rankings that we do. Next slide, please. Just want to mention that Eric Brooks and I are going to be splitting the presentation, and I'm going to be handing it off to him in a few minutes. But in terms of the MBA full-time methodology, which is what we're going to discuss first, it includes full-time programs, and it doesn't include distance and online and part-time and executive MBA programs, which are ranked separately. So this is just full-time traditional bricks and mortar MBA programs. And the universe of our rankings is you have to have a master's program accredited by the AACSB. And in the fall of 2021-22, we are going to be discussing the current rankings on our website. We had a survey universe of nearly 500 schools, and 360ish responded and ended up with 134 ranked. It's important to note that we try to use established definitions when possible, and we use the GMAC definitions, and we follow the MBA, CSEA placement definitions for reporting salary and jobs. And there are some eligibility requirements for the full-time ranking. For the fall, you needed 10 grads seeking for the 21 graduates, the class that graduated in 2021, and of those, and out of your 2021 grads, independently of the 10, you had to have 50% of those seeking. So those are definitions in the placement realm that it's based on. You have to have qualifying placement data to be ranked. Next slide. So the full-time MBA ranking, which is what I'm still discussing, has 8 ranking factors, and the rest of the slides discuss a little bit of more detail about them. But we have the peer assessment score, the recruiter score, salary at graduation, employment 3 months after employment, Gmat, GRE scores, GPA, and acceptance rate. So those are the 8 ranking factors used in the ranking calculations. They can be divided up into 3 groups, and those are benchmarking emphasis, but they're not in and of themselves ranking factors. The next slide. So getting into a little more depth about the peer assessment survey, it's been an annual part of the rankings. The survey is conducted in the fall. It was conducted in the fall of 2021, early 22. We survey two people per school, the business school dean and the MBA program director. So each school is sent 2 surveys, and the surveys are conducted online. And we got around a 46% response rate. And the rating is based on the average score, based on a Likert scale, a 5-point scale. In terms of the recruiter, and that's 25% of the ranking. For the recruiter score, we used the 3 most recent years of recruiter data, and US News collects the recruiter names and corporate contacts. We collected them in the summer of 2021. And that survey was also in the field from fall of 2021 and early 2022. In terms of schools, there's some schools that didn't get enough recruiter ratings to have a recruiter score, and it's published as NA, but you have to have 10 recruiter ratings over the 3-year period to get a recruiter score. Otherwise, you get the lowest score of a ranked MBA program. Next slide, please. So the placement rates are very important in the ranking, and I said we use the MBA CSE definitions, and the at graduation employment rate is 7% weight. The 3 months out rate is 14%. So these rates are calculated out of those seeking jobs. There's in-depth definitions by the MBA CSE about who counts as seeking and who counts as who can be excluded from the cohort. So for the most recent ranking, we were gathering data from the 2021 graduating class. That's for both the salary and bonus. The salary and bonus also counts 14%, and we use a weighted average bonus, which means that if there were a $20,000 bonus, but only 50% of the grads had a bonus, then only $10,000. The average bonus for those with a bonus was $10,000, and that's what's added to the average salary. The next slide, please. In terms of the admissions data, we use Gmat and GRE scores, and they count, 0.1625% of the rankings. This is for the fall of 2021 full-time entering class. They're based on the the scores are converted to percentile distributions that Gmat and GRE publish, and they're weighted by the proportion of test takers in each test. This for schools who have both Gmat and GRE. And we're using both scores because many schools use both tests, and enables us to capture those who are taking tests who are submitting tests as part of admission. For the second consecutive year, we do understand at least the last 2 admission years have been impacted by COVID and the disruption, and it's been a disruption in the admission process. That may or may not be waning. Schools are changing their admission process, but whatever it is, for the last 2 years, it's for schools that have under 25% of their full-time class submitting tests, their score is discounted. In terms of the average undergraduate GPA, that's 7.5%, and we have a small weight for acceptance rate of the next slide. So those are the 8 ranking factors in the using the full-time MBA ranking. We also have specialty rankings. We have 13 subjects, areas that are part of the specialty rankings. And we gather the data from the peer assessment survey. The respondents to the peer assessment survey rank the schools, and that's how we gather this data. They choose up to 15 people, 15 programs in each field that are tops in that field. And to be ranked on usnews.com, you need 7 or more nominations to be ranked. So we're publishing all the schools that have 7 or more ratings, and they're published on usnews.com. So we also do the executive MBA program, which is reputation only. It's based on these nominations for excellence. So that's a reputation only. I think that I'm transitioning to Eric Brooks, who's going to, take it over from here.
Is there a part-time MBA slide next?
No, sorry. Thank you, Eric. Thank you. Guess we need to coordinate. So sorry. We also publish the part-time MBA rankings, which is a separate universe to be qualified for a part-time MBA. You also have to be AACSB accredited. You have to have both 10 students enrolled part-time in the fall of 21, and you also have to have 10 students enrolled part-time in the fall of 2020, which it says on the website. So there were around 300 programs. There's definitely more part-time MBA programs than there are full-time in the US. So there are 300 programs that met those qualifications, and 278 of those submitted enough data to be ranked in the part-time MBA ranking that's on usnews.com. We also have a separate peer assessment survey that's conducted only among this approximately 300 programs that met the eligibility for part-time MBA, and we got around a 51% response rate. It was conducted at the same time, fall 21, early 22. The next slide. So that we're going to quickly go over the 5 ranking factors before I turn it over to Eric. That peer assessment score accounts 50% of the part-time ranking. We also have the average Gmat and GRE scores, which have the same percent submit system as we have for the full-time MBA ranking, and that counts 15%. The undergraduate GPA is 0.125%. Next slide, please. The final two indicators are the percent of schools, percent of the particular business schools fall 21 enrollment, that's part-time. So if a school is 100% part-time, it scores higher in this indicator than if it's not 100%. So we're giving schools more points in this indicator if they're emphasizing part-time. And we're also giving schools credit for having undergraduate work experience. So the longer your undergraduate work experience, that scores higher in this ranking. Those have lower weights, 10% for the work experience and 12.5% for the percent of the program that's part-time. So now I can turn it over to Eric. I guess the next slide.
All right, now it's my turn. Hi, I'm Eric Brooks. I'm the principal data analyst, and I look forward in a bit to having an illuminating and elucidating discussion about their business school rankings. But first, I'm going to shift gears and discuss our undergraduate business rankings. These are AACSB accredited bachelor's degree granting business programs and specialties. It's a very different timeline from everything Bob was discussing earlier, which was the grad school rankings. What he was discussing were most recently published in March, and were in the field late toward the end of last year. By comparison, this pertains to best colleges, so these come out typically around September each year, and they've gone in the field actually last week. So if you are a business school dean or dean of undergraduate academic affairs watching this, and it's not June 6, 2022 yet, then now's as good a time as any to go submit that survey if you haven't already. It's a simple survey. It's 1 to 5 peer ratings where 1's marginal, 5 is outstanding, and the average of the ratings determines each school's rank. And we've been fortunate enough to have very good participation in it. About half the programs participate, and enough so that we've been able to revert back to just using the most recent year's data we collect toward the ranking to have the most current attitudes of schools rating other schools. Next, please. So similar to grad, with colleges, we also do a nominations-based ranking of specialties such as accounting and finance and so forth. So 7 or more ratings based on the number of ratings. That's how we determine those specialty rankings. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to talk about the best online programs rankings. The most recent edition were published in January, and we typically go in the field around late summer, early fall, August, September. Next slide, please. So our 2 major rankings involving business, they're both master's level, but they're a bit different. One is online MBA programs, and that is specific to MBAs. The other is a online graduate business degree program where we ask schools to collect any master's program that's not an MBA. So, a master's in accounting, a master's in finance, a master's in insurance, and they collect and aggregate together, and we do the ranking based on those data. Consequently, it's possible for a school to be ranked in both online MBA and have a separate ranking in online graduate business programs. Next slide, please. So what does online mean? Well, these are dedicated programs for distance learners. They are not residential full-time programs that were, that have become more flexible. These are designed for the learning modality of distance learners. The people in these tend to be older than in the full-time MBA or even part-time MBA rankings. They're mid-career, and that informs how we do the methodologies a bit different. We also Sometimes it's different people reporting data on these surveys. It can be a head of distance learning or continuing education sometimes. And sometimes it is the dean, someone who's out of the business school, a dean, or the business school IR. We don't always know. So please, if your contact's updated, if somebody who should be completing the survey has left, or if you've not participated in the past, but you're going to participate, it's great for us to have as much heads up as you can. So please email that address below with contact information of those people. Next slide, please. So this sort of is a way to visualize how the rankings are different. With a full-time MBA ranking, 86% of schools reported Gmat GRE. With online MBA, only 43% did, and they typically, on average, was just reporting on 13% of their entering class. So a lot of times on paper, the school uses Gmat GRE, but then most get a waiver. So, this is why we do not use Gmat GRE anymore. We discontinued it for best online programs. But when we dropped it this January, we got questions, is part-time MBA next? Is full-time MBA next? And you can see here why we have continued using it in the grad school rankings, whereas we've dropped it in online, even for part-time, where it's much less than full-time. If you were to look just at isolate the top quarter, top 50% of schools, they're making much greater use of standardized testing than the online MBA rankings were. And of course, even age, 32 years in online versus 30 in part-time, 27 in full-time MBA, which informs this next slide. So I'm not going to go indicator by indicator. If you're interested in learning more about the best online programs methodology, Bob and I did a webinar, a US News Live webinar a couple of months ago. But because of the difference, like one example is here we look at graduation rates. And the reason why is, while we do collect MBA, CSEA definitions about graduate earnings, the fact is most new entrants to these programs are already employed. They're already well into their careers. So any type of ranking factor that's looking at what were your earnings when you entered and what were they shortly after you left could be problematic. In fact, sometimes students enrolled in these programs are sponsored by their employer, and in exchange they stay at the company a bit longer. So that's why we look at things like graduation rates and course delivery. Are they giving services that one would expect if they're in a full-time program? Are some of the classes, I think 50% or higher, taught by terminal degree faculty, and as well as graduate indebtedness and admission standards. We want to basically make sure that have standards that are commensurate with the real program, or I shouldn't say the residential program, but then have adapted them for the needs of distance learners. We don't want to just be a program giving a top ranking to a program that just put everything on Blackboard and called it an online program. But we do think prospective students care that there's some of the faculty that are in the traditional business school are teaching some of the classes, and there's admission standards and so forth. So it's kind of a hybrid between some of the things we're doing in the traditional MBA rankings and what's needed for online degree learners. Next slide, please. So we only do 4 specialty rankings for online programs. They're specific to the MBA rankings: analytics, finance, general management, and marketing. And it's based on the number of nominations. And finally, we also do one specific, a business ranking specific to bachelor's degree programs. This is a 1 to 5 scale from marginal to outstanding, and the average of ratings over a 2-year rolling average on 1 to 5 determines each school's rank. And we determine these universes based on whether they were reported to us in the previous edition that they had a major of business as part of their bachelor's degree offerings online. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to change gears and talk about some of the deliverables we provide. Upon request, we offer detailed ranking reports for the 2 most recent ranking editions. These had information about how you performed on each of the ranking factors that's more specific than what we sometimes publish on usnews.com. We also provide the Excel files that schools receive during the embargo period. If you misplaced yours or didn't receive it, we can send those to you again. So email official at US News. Bob and I check it pretty regularly. So just make sure you let us know what rankings you're interested in and what years. That will save us a couple emails back and forth. Next slide, please. Another thing is Compass for full-time and part-time MBA ranking. So when the rankings are published, schools receive Compass access free for a month, and for the next 11 months, which is now in May 2022, there's a subscription, a monthly subscription. It's not much, but there is one, and that gives you access to the full data that we publish on usnews.com, career and salary data, complete rankings that are sometimes hidden behind the website, and the full search tools that we have on usnews.com. So if you want to be able to really see everything that we have, subscribe to Compass. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to talk about Academic Insights. They're sponsoring this session. And this is really, if you want the deep dive into the data and rankings, it has the entire history of online MBA and full-time MBA and part-time MBA rankings, including stuff that were never published on the web, not in the detailed ranking reports, really most of the raw elements that were used and applied toward the rankings and how schools can compare longitudinally across different data points. So you can sort of do with it what you want. Some subscribers, they just want to download the data and plug it in Tableau or do their own analyses. But the great thing is this is a point and click interface. So you can easily, through just selecting options from a dropdown, create your own analyses and visualizations that are integrated to the Academic Insights data, which saves you a lot of time, a lot of effort from having to scrape a bunch of data on the websites. It's more reliable. You're not going to have data entry issues, and it makes reporting to the higher ups a lot easier. So if you're interested in it, contact Academic Insights at usnews.com or the website you see below. Next slide, please. So I'm going to turn it over to Bob to tell us about the future of US News Business Rankings.
Okay. Thanks, Eric. Thank you for how you covered those topic areas. So in terms of the future of business rankings, our primary audience will continue to be prospective B-School students, their parents, and alumni. We are definitely aware, and given the audience for this webinar and our regular interaction with the academic community, that the B-School community remains highly interested in the business school rankings that we're publishing. As many of you are aware of, rankings, including business school rankings, are now a worldwide phenomena, but they'll continue to evolve on a country by country basis. We definitely believe that the business schools, based on our working with business schools, are among the most innovative areas in education, since they're adopting and changing to the economy and to the different ways you can offer business education, and they're definitely, this is evidenced by the growth in online programs and the growth of specialty business degrees. It's also true that business schools are among the most ranked discipline in higher education, and that there's many more people doing business school rankings than in any other field. But having said all that, rankings are here to stay, and we plan to continue to do them at US News. And we also think there will continue to be controversy about rankings, as there has always been. And that leads us into the Q&A session. And as Eric said, if you have questions about your particular school, or we don't answer them in the Q&A, email them to official@usnews.com. And as Eric also said, if you need to update your US News survey contacts, then the the data collection email is how to do that. So I'm going to turn it over to my US News colleagues who are going to be asking us the questions that you've sent in.
Okay, well, thank you very much to our very attentive audience. We have some excellent questions, and I'll start Bob off with the first one, which is a questioner asked, what is the impact on a ranking if the school's Gmat and GRE tests are optional, so the percentage listed overall is small?
Well, I mean, we mentioned that the current methodology that we use for the current ranking, which is all we're going to discuss, is based on percent submit. It's not based on whether the school has a test optional policy or not. So if you have over 25% the aggregated Gmat plus GRE, then you get full credit for your scores. If you had under 25%, you get a proportional discount. If you didn't have any scores at all, then you got an estimate. We're not estimating your scores. It's an estimate used in the rankings.
We have a couple questions that have to do with peer assessment, and I'll break them down into parts. Bob, if you want to start off, and then Eric might want to pitch in also on the second part of the question. Can you comment on why, again, we discussed this often, in the rankings over the years, but why is peer assessment such a large part of the ratings for MBA programs? And in contrast, the online MBA rankings are much more based on data and include information about faculty, curricula, student debt, et cetera. While peer assessment is included, it's much less influential. What's the thinking behind them being approached a little differently?
Well, let me step in on that. A difference between the grad rankings and the online program rankings is we have the recruiter assessment, which is I think 15%. So we have the availability of that data that we don't have for online degree programs, and that enables us to put greater weight on peer assessment or on quality assessment in the grad school rankings.
And the second part of that question for either Bob and Eric this is a familiar one, which is that how do you trust people to be honest about their peer assessments? I mean, do some schools want to do a negative assessment of a school because they want to drive that school's rank down? How do you address that? That's a perennial question.
We don't see that in our data. I mean, the ratings are anonymous, but year to year, the peer scores schools receive are pretty stable. And if schools were doing, a random walk through the survey where, just giving everybody, it was random and they're just giving a different score every year, you would see schools getting different scores in the peer score year to year. We also don't see people survey response giving everybody a 1 or doing anything crazy like that. So I think that speaks to the value of peer assessment, and we see a decent dispersion of scores. We see a lot of 5 scores, 3s, 2s, 1s, which demonstrates an awareness of these programs. If everybody was getting a 3 except 1 or 2 schools at the top or bottom, that would be more concerning that schools only were able to rate a handful of them, but that's not the case.
And we also use a trimmed mean where we take out a few of the highest scores and a few of the lowest scores to try to eliminate at least some of the impact of strategic voting. And I mean we think that the reputation of a school is important, especially it says something about the value of the degree. It's not the most important pivotal factor, but it does play an impact in the hiring, who gets hired, who comes to recruit at schools and so it's playing a role about the public perception of 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 the of that degree in the marketplace, and that's what the peer survey is is measuring.
Thank you. We have another question on GMATs and GREs. Is the 25% floor for these tests this year reduced due to COVID? Will it be returning to 50% at some point?
Well, we're not ready to make an announcement about what the next methodology will be. I mean, we'll have to, talk to the schools and see what the fall of 2022 data is, whether there's been an uptick in SATs use again, in GMAT and GRE usage again. We're not sure. I mean, there was a big disruption in students being able to take the GMAT and GRE. So it's an unknown, but we'll certainly study the data, which we have to do before we.
And we're not sure about SAT either. But one thing I'll point out about GMAT and GRE is we've now done 2 years where I guess we had, COVID year admissions data, and we studied it. And 2 years ago is when we lowered the threshold to 25%. But we've noticed that even though percent submit dropped quite a bit, the scores that schools were reporting were pretty stable year to year. So that actually gives us some pretty good, confidence that if we do have to keep it at 25%, that could, is analytically valid. If we were instead to see that when a school drops their percent submit, there was, huge rise in the average score because the people who had bad scores weren't reporting them, that would be more concerning. But we haven't seen that yet.
Yeah, I mean, we are aware that there's definitely changing trends in test optional and tests being required and their credentials that some schools are using for admission, and we just need to study it more, as Eric said, before we decide what we're going to do next time.
As a follow-up, an audience questioner asked, can you elaborate on the estimate related to the GMAT scores if a school doesn't submit information?
I think it's -1 standard deviation, but
below the mean.
Below the mean, but it's not meant to be an estimate of what that school's score would be. It's an estimate because that's used for the purpose of ranking calculations.
And as you saw in an earlier slide, I think I don't have it memorized, it was like 80 some odd % of schools reported that we ranked some data on GMAT or GRE.
Okay. On the part-time MBAs, a couple questions. Do programs also have to offer full-time MBAs to be considered for the part-time rankings?
No, they just have to have, they just have to submit a survey. I mean, you need to submit the statistical survey, and you have to be part of the AACSB accredited universe, and then you have to submit the survey saying you had 10 students enrolled and be included in the peer assessment survey.
Yeah, I think, and you correct me if I'm wrong, even though we only send one statistical survey, that's a business survey, I don't believe any of the data used for full-time MBA is used for part-time MBA rankings.
It's not. They're separate. The survey has both separate questions for part-time MBA and full-time MBA, but there are of the 278 programs that are ranked in part-time, and I don't have the exact number, but some pretty big number of them are only part-time only, and so they're definitely included in the rankings.
Mm-hmm. And we see some of those part-time programs in our online degree rankings too.
Right.
We have another peer rating question tied to the part-time. Is US News going to try to, does it want to encourage a greater response rate for the peer rating? 50% participation seems a little low to have such a large weight in the overall part-time MBA ranking. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, there's two thoughts. One is we actually get a good response rate. It was around 50%. So for a reputation survey, that's actually a very good response rate in terms of this type of survey. So the response rate itself is good. That's different. Are we weighting it too high? I mean, I think we have an aspiration of getting other data. I'm not saying that we're about to use this other data, but we have been collecting now. The MBA CSE has definitions, standards for part-time programs. I'm not saying it's ready to be used in the rankings. I think that maybe there's more outcomes data we can use, but at this point, that's the weight we're using.
And I want to double down on what Bob said. I mean, I think 50%, is a pretty good response rate. I get asked to do surveys all the time. Every time I buy something, I don't complete half of them. So the fact that we're getting about half the survey respondents to take time out of the rest of their jobs to complete a survey for us, we greatly appreciate it, and we're very impressed that so many are willing to do it and take an interest in what we're doing.
So we have, Bob, you touched on this earlier. We have several questions about the organizations, the accreditation organizations we use for different rankings. Can you just take a little time again to explain why you choose ACB, SP, and then their questions are, AAC, SP, and then is there any interest in more doing ACB, SP in the future? Can you tell your thoughts about the selection and why for different rankings?
Well, I mean, we have been using, of course, this doesn't mean that we shouldn't be open-minded to other accrediting bodies, but we've been using the AACSB as the, I guess, as the entry, the credential to be accredited since the beginning of the business school rankings, as a way of having, an outside group that they have to go through some decent number of hoops or have certain standards to get the AACSB accredited. So we thought that was important to meet that standard to be ranked, and it means you have it generally means that you have a specific business school or business department, and you're not just offering business courses. So you have some heft to what's being offered, and you have some resources dedicated, a certain number of resources and faculty and other standards.
It's not a small universe either. In our undergraduate rankings, we already send a peer survey to about 500 schools roughly that we rank each year. So that's probably large enough without opening it up to schools that don't have accreditation or have accreditation that isn't the gold standard of accreditation. For our online degree program rankings, online MBA and online graduate business, we actually do survey schools. They have to be at a regionally accredited institution, but the program does not need to have ACSB accreditation. That said, it is a kind of a ranking factor where a school gets more credit on their engagement practices ranking factor if they have that AACSB accreditation, and they get some credit if they have ACBSP or IACBE accreditation.
I think if we were doing global business school rankings, I think we'd have to look at accreditation differently. But as Eric, I don't really know enough about the other accreditors to have a detailed comment, but we do. Our belief is, as Eric said, that is the gold standard or the most rigorous, at least for U.S. schools, the rigorous business school accreditation, and that's why we're using it to have the entry to be part of the universe.
On recruiter score again, do you have a sense of what the current recruiter score response rate is?
Well, we haven't been giving that out, but we do know that the that because we're using the total of 3 years of surveys, there's some pretty big percentage of schools that get 10 or more ratings. There are some of the ranked schools that don't. They're definitely a busier group of people than deans, or they respond less than the academics. But we're aggregating for 3 years data. But
A quick question on the online MBA programs. Just they're asking for clarification from the audience. Going forward, you are not using Gmat as part of those rankings.
We discontinued it for the last edition, and we don't, comment for, say, what definitely we will not do in the future. However, if next year's data resemble this year's data, we would not reintroduce Gmat and GRE scores in the rankings computations.
Okay, we're to our final question here. In the future, back to peer assessment, will the peer assessment survey be administered to more targeted audiences similar to the recruiter assessment survey?
well, I mean, we believe that the peer assessment is targeted. I mean, for the MBA peer assessment, it's for the MBA, the B school dean, and the MBA program director. So that's targeted at the two people who are actively running the business school, and the part-time MBA program is targeting the B school dean and the program director. So they are targeting people who are running the program. In terms of the recruiters, I mean, we're asking each school to give us the names of the recruiters, or if they're not recruiters in the traditional sense, corporate contacts, schools that traditionally, companies who traditionally hire from the schools, and then each name that's submitted gets contacted after deduping. So we are targeting. We believe we're targeting to the people that are hiring and the academics that are running it. I'm not 100% sure what the question means, but we believe we are targeting.
Well, thank you, Bob and Eric, and thanks to all of you in the audience for joining us for your good questions. If we didn't have a chance to get to your question today, or if you have others, please contact us at official@usnews.com. You can also read more about our rankings and content at usnews.com/grad. Thank you all very much.
Well, thank you for Liz and Michael for being facilitating and putting this all together.
Thanks, everyone. Those were good questions.
Yes, they were very good questions. We appreciate that.
Thank you all.